Talk about ketosis. So we're going to be talking about the keto diet. Before we get into the details of the diet, I want to talk about the history of the diet. I'm always fascinated with how things get started. And the ketogenic diet really started way back in the day. It started with epilepsy. So epilepsy was not always a disease that people knew what it was or what to do with it. So they thought way back in the day that it had to do with evil spirits. They probably thought a lot of health conditions had to do with evil spirits. And so the goal with epileptic patients was to get the evil spirits out. And unfortunately, this was not a very humane practice, the way that they tried to get these evil spirits out of these patients that were suffering. Doctors back in Hippocrates' day, before Hippocrates, practiced what was called trepanation. And basically that means they were drilling holes in people's skulls, trying to let the evil spirits out, because that's what they thought was causing these epileptic episodes. And of course, now we know that that's not what causes epilepsy. And we have medication that can help manage that, thankfully. We're no longer drilling holes in people's heads. So we're grateful for modern science and the ability to manage that. But what did come out of epilepsy was more human experimentation, if you will. And of course, the founder of medicine is Hippocrates, and he has lots of cool sayings and quotes that we see kind of floating around the internet here and there. And back in 400 BCE, he worked on a guy with seizures, and he noticed that he put this patient of his on a fasting diet. So this guy wasn't eating at all, and he abstained from all types of food. And by day 6, he noticed that his patient no longer had seizures. So there was clearly something happening through the diet that was benefiting this guy's epileptic episodes and causing them to no longer occur. Pretty cool stuff. So fast forward a few hundred years later, there was a Persian doctor, and he noticed the opposite observation. He noticed that when he overfed his patients, or his patients were overfed, they had an increase in epileptic episodes. So clearly, once again, there was this connection throughout history that, fasting and increasing food in the diet caused an increase or decrease in seizures. Pretty cool stuff. So there were some Parisian doctors who, back in 1911, looked into some of these observations that were probably passed on throughout history. And I'm sure that Hippocrates, of course, taught many healers around the world at that time, and established, many practices that, carried on throughout the world. And so this Parisian doctor tried fasting for epileptic children and had some success with it. And that's really what started, the spreading of this fasting as a treatment for epilepsy. Well, fast forward another decade, and an endocrinologist by the name of Rollin Woodyat experimented with a low-carb, high-fat fasting mimicking diet. So at the time, they didn't call it a ketogenic diet. They just noticed that when they put people on this high-fat, low-carb diet, they got the same benefit as those patients that underwent a strict fast. Well, I think I had a timer on my slides, so we're going to go back there. So what came out of that was basically that a ketogenic diet, Dr. Russell Wilder was the first one who, coined the term ketogenic diet, and found that it had excellent results with epileptic children. And that soon became a part of the medical treatment of ketogenic diets. And you can, go back to that period of time, about the 1920s, when that started appearing in medical texts as a treatment for epilepsy. And then into the 1940s, that was part of a standard protocol in childhood epilepsy, and is still used today. So pretty cool, just, context of where we're coming from, and just the fact that, a lot of diets are, kind of trendy, things that kind of come and go. They don't really, stick around for the long term, or they're not well studied. Well, the ketogenic diet actually has roots in, thousands of years of observation, and then, close to 100 years in actual medical use, which is pretty cool. So what the heck is keto, man? So keto, of course, is short for ketosis. And ketosis is really identified as the presence of ketones in the bloodstream. And ketones are a chemical that the body produces when it burns stored fat. So this is a natural metabolic state in the absence of glucose. So when we're talking about glucose, of course, our body makes glucose from carbohydrates. And this is a shift in metabolism, a shift in what our body begins to use as fuel, as that energy source. So fat is converted, stored fat is converted into ketone bodies, and they're used for energy in our brain, energy in our muscles, energy in our organs, and really any tissue in the body that needs energy to function, which is pretty much all of them. So how exactly does this work? So we have a picture here of a liver and a brain, and this is a lot of where ketosis actually takes place. And so the body prefers glucose as a primary fuel source, right? So it always wants the easiest path to create energy, and that's really what comes down to. And glucose is very easy for the body to convert into energy. And when I say energy, I'm talking about something called ATP. So ATP is what our cells use to make things work, everything inside the cell, and then to make our muscles move and make our organs work. We need this form of energy called ATP. So that, carbs are easily broken down. They're easily stored. We can store carbs in our liver, in our muscles, in the form of glycogen, and we can break those down very quickly whenever our body needs a boost of energy. So that way we don't always have to be consuming carbohydrates. We have some on hand. So when we move into a ketogenic state, we're mimicking a fasted state. So remember, we had that observation in epileptic children that they had the same benefit when they were in a fasted state and when they were in a high fat diet. So in both of those states, the body uses up all the stored sugar. It goes to its reserve fuel, which is fat, its secondary fuel, because it takes actually more energy to break down fat and use it as fuel, because there's a few more conversion steps involved. And so obviously it's not as convenient. It's not as easily or readily used. So it takes a little while for that conversion to take place. So we can go to this diagram here. And we basically see that, short chain and medium chain fatty acids. When we're talking about fats we consume, we have long chain, short chain, medium chain, all these different types of chains that can go into our body and essentially have to be broken down before they can be absorbed, right? So in order for those fats to become available as fuel, they have to become broken down to the right level, but they also have to be acetylated. We have to attach an acetyl group, and it has to be converted into this chemical called acetyl-CoA. And that's what allows our body to turn that into fuel and produce energy. So it basically goes through this step, and you can see our diagram of the liver here. And once that fatty acid is converted into acetyl-CoA here, it either goes to the TCA cycle, which is in our mitochondria. That's the powerhouse of our cell that creates energy. This is called the Krebs cycle. Some of you may be familiar with that, but that's what produces ATP. Or it can go down a different path where basically it is turned into ketone bodies. So when it's turned into a ketone body, it can then travel in our bloodstream and fuel other tissues in our body. So you can see that the last chemical in this step is something called beta hydroxybutyrate. And if we go up one, we have acetyl-CoA and acetoacetate. So the two primary ketones that we're going to talk about today are going to be beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate. And so acetoacetate is something that we can detect in our urine to make sure that we're in ketosis. And beta hydroxybutyrate we can actually detect in our bloodstream. So both of these indicate that we are in fact in ketosis. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we get into ketosis, but you can see that these compounds can travel to the brain and they can actually go through the blood-brain barrier. Not many things can get through the blood-brain barrier, but we can actually start to use ketones as fuel for our brain as well, which is pretty cool. So fats can be pretty cool and become very useful to have on hand, especially when you're using fat as fuel and you've completely depleted yourself of carbs. Let's see, I think that's, yes, we're moving on. So we're going to zoom in a little bit. So remember how we talked about this TCA or Krebs cycle? So this produces ATP, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about that. Maybe this is too much detail for some of you. However, I think it's fun to learn how this stuff works and understand a little bit better what's going on inside your body. Because sometimes if we don't understand something, it's a little bit scary and we, tend to shy away from it because we think it might be dangerous. But if we do it correctly and we don't have a contraindication to, going into ketosis, it's completely fine. So anyways, we talked about ATP and we talked about the Krebs cycle. So this is inside the cell. And this is inside an organelle inside the cell called the mitochondria, which makes ATP. So this Krebs cycle is basically a cycle of steps. And you can see how we go from 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. And ideally, we produce glucose with this. However, this cycle can also sort of be hacked to also start to use ketones as fuel. So you can see that we can use acetyl-CoA, and we can see that fats are converted into that compound that can then enter the cycle and be turned into ATP. And we can see that there's some interconversion between the ketones as well. And that allows this cycle to turn and produce energy. So of course, glucose can enter this cycle at this first stage. Glucose turns into pyruvate, turns into acetyl-CoA, and goes into the cycle. We can also see that some amino acids enter this cycle. And then of course, we can see that some ketones directly enter this cycle and are converted into acetyl-CoA and go through all those steps too. And so that's how ketones actually turn into energy, and that's how they can replace glucose. Pretty interesting. And, I think it's good to understand how that actually works. So what are the benefits of keto? Now that we've understood a little bit of the science of how it works, what are the benefits of this? Well, there's been a lot of research that's been done on weight loss, blood glucose balance, neurologic or cognitive benefits. Remember the how this thing got started with epilepsy. That's a neurologic condition. That's a malfunction of part of the brain that causes the body to not work properly. So there's some anti-inflammatory research with the keto diet as well. Reduced usage of insulin. And of course, when we have less insulin that is used, our body doesn't have to store as much fat, because insulin is a storage hormone and a hormone that unlocks cells and lets things in. So that's actually what attaches to the GLUT4 receptor and opens that up and allows glucose to go into the cell. But it also, causes some other things to happen too if we have too much insulin that's constantly released. So the benefits too is that we have more mobilization or more burning of fat as fuel. And of course, that can reduce some of those fat stores in our body. Now, of course, we're going to talk about energy balance and caloric restriction and things like that, because that does come into play. And we want to be, we want to take that into consideration. But the cool thing about keto too is that it spares protein as a fuel source. And so ideally what we don't want is protein to be used as a fuel, because that really provides all the structural support in our body for everything from enzymes to muscles to bones, ligaments, joints, everything that holds our body together and makes it work properly requires protein and amino acids. So we don't want to use those up as fuel. We want those to stay as structural components in our body. The other thing that we find with keto is that it affects the hormones ghrelin and leptin, and these really play a huge role in satiety and hunger control. So a lot of times, if we're eating a diet that's high in carbohydrates, high in processed foods, that really doesn't satisfy us, and we might eat a lot of calories, but it doesn't signal to those hormones. It doesn't set those off in the right amounts to let our brain know that we're actually full and that we're done. We should be done eating, right? So it allows us to kind of surpass that normal limit. Well, with the keto diet, we found that people have better appetite control. Some of the cool things with the keto diet too is that there's strong evidence with diabetes. There's actually some really cool clinical trials going on with low carb and keto diets on people being able to get off their medication. Now, of course, this is being managed with their medical doctor, prescribing physician, or clinician, but they are able to do it. There's been, hundreds of thousands of testimonials of people that have been able to do this and kind of reverse that metabolic disorder that's going on in their body, and the over production of insulin to the point where their pancreas just, kind of burns out, and, they become, just intolerant to insulin. So basically that's a pretty awesome thing, because we see the rates of diabetes going through the roof. And of course, the price of insulin as a medication going up as well. So if you want to think about an alternative, something to, move you in a different direction, this is definitely something worth trying out and seeing if you can do a couple trials with it and see if it helps you. A lot of people use it for weight reduction. It is a good way to cut out processed foods and carbs that, really can help, boost that number on the scale pretty easily. It's so easy to overconsume carbs, overconsume processed foods and sweets, because remember, we don't get that hunger signal through leptin and ghrelin properly. And so what happens is we begin to crave more. And usually when it's a sweet craving, it can become sort of an addiction, right? The other cool thing is there's been some increase in cardiovascular risk factors. So you talk about things like cholesterol and triglycerides and balancing out LDL and HDL. Well, there's been a lot of cool research coming out that showing that you can help balance some of those cardiovascular risk factors as well. And then some future research or some research that's currently going on with cancer patients, polycystic ovarian syndrome, neurologic diseases beyond epilepsy, and acne as well. So what is the keto diet? What exactly is this thing? Well, if we had to break it down to macronutrients, so when we're talking about carbs, fats, and proteins, it's mostly fat. As you can see from our pie graph here on the left side, 72.5% of your caloric intake is fat. And that's a shock to some people when they first learn that, because of course we've been taught from a very young age, and we've heard for the longest time that fat makes you fat, and fat raises your cholesterol, and it is absolutely, bad for you. And, while there are some people that have maybe some genetic things that maybe cause them to have higher cholesterol, there is a risk benefit that you may have to weigh out with your doctor and figure out if you could still do, the keto diet and lower your risk for all those things that we just talked about. And maybe you have some mild elevation of your LDL cholesterol. It's because that is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So you do want to be wary of that, but you shouldn't let that stop you if your insulin is within normal range, your glucose is within normal range, your inflammatory markers are within normal range, your weight isn't within normal range. And let's say your only thing that is off is your LDL cholesterol. Well, it's probably worth that one risk factor being elevated a little bit, right? So anyways, I'm going to digress a little bit, but you can see that protein is, makes up a pretty good portion here at 22.5%. And then carbs are right around that 5% range, right? So there's not a lot of carbs at all. And really, for most people, 50 grams of carbs per day is right where you want to be. And you really don't want to go over that, because for most people, unless you're like 6'8", like 290, and you're ripped and you're lean, you're just, full of muscle, Maybe you could get up to 100 grams or something like that, a little bit over. But for most of us, 50 grams of carbs is going to fill up our carb stores in our body. And then our body will begin using glucose as fuel instead of those fatty acids and producing ketones. So if you look at what we're going to eat the most of, it's going to be meat. It's going to be some cheeses. We're going to have some avocados, coconuts, olives, lots of, bacon, which is awesome. And then most of our carbs are going to come in the form of vegetables, and we will have some fruits in there. But when I talk about the keto diet, I'm really talking about a cleaner version of keto. Excuse me, I know there's a lot of different versions out there. Some people, do keto on fast food, and you can do that technically. However, I would recommend that you stick to cleaner, less processed whole foods if you're going to do this, because you still want some fiber, you still want some antioxidants and phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals in your diet to help optimally help your body function optimally. So how do you get into ketosis? So you can do it a couple different ways. So you can go on a fast, and typically if you're going to fast, some people will start out with a 48-hour fast or a 24-hour fast and combine it with some exercise. And basically what that does is, because your body prefers carbs as a primary fuel source, it's going to use all that up while you're fasting. Then by the time you finish that 48-hour fast, you will be depleted of all your stored carbohydrates, all your glycogen, and your body is going to switch over and start burning fat as fuel and producing ketones. If you don't want to do the fast, some people prefer not to because they may, get some uncomfortable symptoms, or, they just prefer not to do that. And you can start off with a, lowering of your overall grams of carbs, over the first week. And essentially, what you'd have to do is limit yourself to about 25 to 50 grams of carbs for the first 6 days. And for most people, with some form of exercise and activity, that's going to get your body into ketosis by the end of that first week. So of course, intense exercise, something around 45 minutes to an hour, can rapidly deplete your carb stores, and a few days of that in a row with a low carb diet will definitely get you there very quickly without having to do a fast. And, like we talked about, some of it depends on who you are as an individual. Are you very lean? Do you eat a lot of carbs? Did you have more stored up in your body, et cetera? It may depend. And if you're a larger individual, you can hold more carbs in your muscles, and it's going to take you a little bit longer. But generally, if you have more muscle mass, you're going to be able to burn through those stored carbs a little bit quicker too. All right. So some safety considerations. We always want to talk about safety first, right? So some people, you may have heard this term keto flu, and some people may experience that. And basically what that means is you get a little bit of nausea, dizziness, fatigue, or cramping. And it's a normal thing. It's not a comfortable thing, but it is a normal thing for some people. I wouldn't say it's a common thing. I wouldn't say 80% of the people experience that. I'd say it's, probably 5% or less. Some people may notice a little bit change in exercise performance, because remember, you're going from carbs, which is the primary fuel source your muscles require for short burst, powerful movements. And then you're switching to fats, which can also provide your muscle that same function. But there are some people that notice an initial decline in exercise performance on maybe some of those shorter, more powerful movements. Now, when it comes to distance running, things 30 minutes, 45 minutes, hour or longer, there's really no change in exercise performance. It stays about the same, which is pretty cool. The tough thing about this too is that, we're all isolating right now, so it's not a big deal. It's kind of a good time to do a keto diet. But if you're around family, if you have events or holidays, parties that you are going to, and they don't have ketogenic foods available, high fat, high protein foods, it can be challenging. If you drink a lot of alcohol and all of a sudden you can't consume a lot of alcohol, that can be a problem too. So alcohol can convert to basically sugar in your body, and it can cause some issues with your metabolism when you're in ketosis. So you want to be aware that, you will have to decrease your alcohol consumption. There is a risk, like we said, of increasing triglycerides in some people and LDL in some people. Doesn't happen in everybody. But once again, that's something that you should discuss with a qualified clinician. And, that's a conversation that really you want to talk to a doctor that may be somewhat familiar with the ketogenic diet. You don't want to, talk about that with somebody who is completely unfamiliar, because they're just going to tell you not to do it right away. And if it is something that you're truly interested in doing, talk to somebody that's qualified to talk about it. That may mean that you have to look for that clinician to have that conversation, and that's okay. You can do that. Risk of nutrient deficiencies, I would say if you're eating a dirty diet. So if most 80% of your diet comes from fast food, processed food, your risk of nutrient deficiency is going to be pretty high. You want to make sure you're getting enough electrolytes, and, multivitamin is a good idea when you're on the keto diet. But also just try to eat whole, unprocessed foods as much as possible, and you won't have to worry about that. If you are diabetic and you are on medication, of course, you'd want to let your doctor know about that, and make sure that you're on the same page when it comes to a game plan of, adjusting metformin or insulin or anything in that regard. And then when you're on the keto diet, the thing about diets, the way you lose weight is caloric restriction. That is the number one rule with any diet. So make sure you have a calorie limit. So when you start any new diet, you want to make sure you track and you measure, and you make sure you understand what's actually going on in your body. And you have a good feel for, what you're eating and how much. Otherwise, you can gain weight on the keto diet. So how do you monitor if you're actually in ketosis? So there's a couple different ways you can do that. Of course, you can get a blood ketone monitor. So we talked about ketones that are, available in the blood when you go into ketosis, and one of those is beta hydroxybutyrate. You can pick up a monitor for anywhere between, $60 all the way up to $100, but it's just like a diabetes blood glucose monitor. You can prick your finger, you put the stick into the meter, and it will give you a readout of how much BHB you have in your blood. It's pretty cool, actually. I have one of those when I did my keto, and it was fun to see your reading. It's not fun to prick your finger, but it is fun to see your reading. You can also get urine ketone strips. I've done this one as well, and this one tests acetoacetate in the urine, and it's also a good way to do it. It's a little bit less accurate than the blood meter. That's probably the most accurate, but you can do that as well. And then you can buy a breath meter. I don't know too many people actually use that, and the accuracy can fluctuate depending on the quality of the meter that you purchase. But ideally, when you're testing, you want to be within a range, and you'll get a readout. These little colors on the sticks, whatever color it changes when you urinate on it, will indicate how much ketones are in your urine. And that indicates if you're in fact in ketosis. So I would recommend, especially early on, maybe for the first 4 weeks or so, that you measure your ketones either in blood or urine. And that way you know that you're truly in ketosis. So the last thing you want to do is eat a bunch of fat and you're not in ketosis. And of course, that's going to increase your cholesterol. And if you're eating a processed food diet, that can have some negative consequences. So make sure you're actually in ketosis. And usually that's between about 1.5 to 2.5 is kind of a good range to be. And then you start getting into some ranges where you're not quite where you want to be. So a meter, either through the urine stick or the actual blood prick meter, that's a good way to do that for sure. So what are the keys to success? Keys to success with the keto diet. So weigh in, definitely track your weight when you do keto. It's cool to see your results anyways, and understand that you are not your weight. So if your goal is to lose weight, don't identify with the number on the scale. Just recognize that it's a data point, just like your meter, right? With your ketones. Like you don't want to be in a good mood or bad mood if you are in or out of ketosis one day. It's a data point. So you get your information, you get your piece of data, and you adjust accordingly. And that's what the number on the scale is as well. It's a number on a scale. It's a data point. But it is something that's good to track, especially if one of your goals is weight loss. So you want to weigh in at least once a week. You can weigh in more often than that. I weigh in every single day just because I like to know. And as soon as I start seeing that number trending in the wrong direction, I know I need to change some things to get it back on track. And that's a good check for myself to do. I know a lot of people don't like to do that. A good way to do it as well from a tracking standpoint is open up a MyFitnessPal account and track your food, log your food. Do that for at least 2 weeks. A lot of people get annoyed with this and they fall off, but it's free and it's a great tool to use to hold yourself accountable. Do it with a friend. Plan strategically. You can also cycle on and cycle off of keto. And you can get back into ketosis. And once you do that a few times, you can learn to do it pretty quickly and you'll understand, how your body does that. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. And if you do have any concerns, of course, I can either help point you in the right direction as to a doctor to work with or to find, or I can make some recommendations myself. Of course, I can't prescribe, medication, and I'm not going to tell you to take medication or don't take medication. That's not my job. So consult your physician for that. But it is good if you are on medication and you're concerned about what this diet may do, have that conversation, find a doctor that would be willing to have that conversation with you. So I want to thank you guys for hanging out. I want to walk you guys through this guide. Before we do, I want to thank you guys. This is my gift to you. Half an hour of your night is valuable time. Although all of us have a little bit more time on our hands right now. But if you guys have further questions, feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram. And that's my handle right there at the Nutrient Fix, or shoot me an email or check out my website. I do have a 7-day keto plan that you can purchase. It's $7. I do have a 28-day plan that you can purchase. It's $28. So check those out if you're interested. These are clean plans, as we talked about, whole foods, unprocessed, and they will get you into ketosis. And it gives you a good template of where to start, how to do it. And, is a good template that has worked for some other people that have done these as well. If you want an individual plan, I can also adjust that within the time frame that you're looking, either 7 days, 14 days, 28 days, or longer. Of course, I do charge more if it's individualized, but I can offer that as well. So let's walk through this guide. So everyone who attended live is going to get a copy of this thing, and it really gets you all the information you need and then some to get going on the keto diet. And we'll answer a lot of frequently asked questions that people may have. So it basically, walks through what is the keto diet? How do you get started? What are some of those benefits that we talked about? Has an awesome list of foods that, let you know from a dairy standpoint, what has lower amounts of carbs, higher amounts of protein and fat. And you can basically go through those first 4 pages and, set up a really good shopping list from that. Next, you get into actually a 3-day diet plan, which gives you a good template of what to follow and what to consider eating for 3 days. And, you could rotate that and extend it out into a week, and you got your free week right there. But it has the meal plan next and has some good options. These are clean diets. So, you don't have to worry about loading up on fast food or anything like that. It does require some food prep. So plan that day out. If that's Saturday, Sunday, whatever your Saturday, Sunday is during the week, plan it out, make it happen. And then there's some really cool comparison aspects in here, just helping you understand some of the other low carb diets out there and what some of the differences are. So it compares Atkins with paleo and keto, and really helps you understand why these are different. And, if you've tried some of these in the past, maybe what to expect. And then a little bit more education and, finding where hidden carbs are. So once again, if we're not tracking our carbs through MyFitnessPal, if we're not measuring with a ketone meter, those hidden carbs can actually add up very, very quickly. And you can think that, I've had one banana, one banana is maybe 26 grams of carbs. How am I not in ketosis? Well, it's all the other, condiments and all the other hidden sugars and sweeteners that are in all these processed foods that we all consume and we don't bat an eye at, right? So we want to make sure that we're aware of those when we're making our meals and planning. And if we're going out to eat and still trying to eat keto, there's going to be a lot more of those hidden sweeteners and sugars in our food. And then, of course, what can you do from a healthy fat standpoint to add those in your diet? And then what should you add from an electrolyte and mineral standpoint? And then when it comes to testing, this is a really cool diagram, and it just kind of explains the range that you want to be in. And then we talked about the blood meter, we talked about the urine strips, and it explains a little bit of that information there as well. And then, of course, you can get shakes and supplements. And I will say when it comes to supplements, you don't really need exogenous ketones. So a lot of people will try to sell you exogenous ketones to get into ketosis, and that's a pseudo ketosis state. So if you're taking in something that is a ketone, and then you're measuring a ketone, it's going to tell you on the meter that you're in ketosis. Well, that's a false positive, right? Because it's not a ketone produced by your fat that's being burned in your body. It's a ketone produced from the supplement that you just took. So, I would say unless you are a professional athlete or you are a very serious athlete, ketone supplements are probably something that you don't really need. But what you may need is an electrolyte. What you may need is something to keep you hydrated, and a multivitamin is very appropriate. So I would say, that at a minimum is way more important than buying a super expensive ketone supplement, right? And then some FAQs, frequently asked questions, and how long does it take to adapt, and some of those questions, and how long do the effects last, and some good tips on, sleep and hydration and things like that. And then cholesterol as well. But that's pretty much it for the guide. So anyone who showed up, you get a copy of that. Let me see if I can pull up the quiz questions here, and we will end with our quiz questions. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. Can you guys, I don't know if anyone can let me know if you can see the questions on the screen here, but I'm curious, how many of you have thought about trying a keto diet? Has anyone thought about trying one? If you can see that, if you can click something on your screen, go ahead and try and click that if you can. So we got some people clicking away here. Some people never have. Some people thought about it, but wasn't sure if it was safe. Done some research. We don't have any fanatics. I'm kind of surprised. That's interesting. Usually we have like one that's like crazy about keto. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And there's the results there. Let me see if I can move to question 2. All right, so question 2, a true or false here. So the keto diet is a fad diet that has no scientific or medical backing. What do you guys think about that? Go ahead and give me a true or a false. Yes, we are doing well. We got 100% correct answers on that one. And of course, that is false. It's not a fad diet. There is great scientific evidence, great research backing that. Let me see. I'm going to move on to the next one here. Okay. This one might stump you guys. So what is the primary ketone measured in the blood? What do you guys think about that one? This might trip you up. I'm hoping to stump at least one person. All right, we got 3 answers in. The correct answer is beta hydroxybutyrate. So remember, that's the one that's produced and travels in our bloodstream. ATP is what's produced in our mitochondria, and acetyl-CoA is what enters our Krebs cycle. All right, I'm going to see if I can pull up the next one here. Okay, so check all the choices that have good research when it comes to the keto diet. So you can pick multiple answers on this one too. All right. Yeah. And all those are somewhat correct. Of course, weight loss, diabetes, reducing cardiovascular risk, epilepsy probably have the most. There is research on cancer and acne. So good job on that one. We're going to move on to carb question. The keto diet is comprised of about 5% of total calories coming from carbs. Is that true or false? And that one is true. Definitely true. All right, we're going to move on to the next one here. So supplements are the best way to get into ketosis. Is that true or is that false? That is false. Good job. You guys got that one. Good job. And we're going to move down to one more here. Most people cannot tolerate the keto diet. Is that true or is that false? All right, we got 2 that say false, 1 that says true. The answer is actually false. Most people can tolerate the keto diet. It's actually very well tolerated for the majority. In some people, there are some things that, maybe not in the beginning be as favorable. But overall, most people perform very, very well, and it's a very good diet for them. Here's the results on that one. Last but not least, what are the biggest mistakes people make on the keto diet? You can choose multiple answers for this one. This will be our last question, and then we'll wrap it up for the night. All right, good job. So you guys nailed that one as well. So I would say, most people probably remember to eat, right? They might start out with a fast, but yeah, they don't track, they don't measure, they don't count their calories. So they overconsume calories. We still want to be at least within a range, right? So yeah, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you guys so much for attending, and I'll get that keto guide out to you guys. If you know anyone else who's interested in the keto diet, of course, come tell them to talk to me. If they're interested in a plan, I can help them out with that as well. Or even, networking and connecting with a doctor if they are, trying to do this thing safely and they're just not really sure who to discuss if they're on a medication or whatnot. But anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging out. I hope you guys have a great evening, and take care. Stay safe.